All right, and welcome to what will be the last lecture of this week, and definitely the longest, I'm almost sure, possibly the longest of term, but I simply don't know how to break up a lecture on the Trinity without breaking it up into a million parts. So I'm going to try to just do this in a one go, because, man, it's the grandest mystery in Christianity. And I'm going to try to explain some parts of it, but I'm almost just going to just present it as we believe it and let you bask in the strangeness, the lunacy of it, or the glory of it. So, when you're thinking about the Trinity, of course you think of Justin Bieber. Of course you don't. But when I'm doing this class on site, I like to play a video. There's this video of Justin Bieber thanking some group for some award. And he says, "I want to thank not only God, but Jesus Christ." Now, did you catch what was wrong with that statement? Well, of course. Jesus is God. You can't thank not only God, but Jesus Christ. That's like saying, I want to thank not only my mom and dad, but my parents. But we shouldn't be a little too hard on the little Bieber. It's a common mistake. Yeah, we say Jesus is God, we say the Father is God, we say the Spirit is God, but what on earth does that mean? How can we say that they're all three one God, but still three distinct persons? Well, the first thing we need to understand, the first thing we need to understand is that because the Trinity is God, it's not like the Trinity is a further thing from God. That transcendent being that we're talking about when we say God is a Trinity. And therefore, the Trinity doesn't just exist. It's the foundation of all existence. The Trinity not just is, but is the foundation of all being. It is all isness. The Trinity is being itself because God is being itself and God is a Trinity. And therefore, Christians don't just believe in the Trinity. The Trinity is the foundation of all Christian belief. All beliefs and all doctrines and dogmas for Christianity flows from this primal declaration that God is Trinity. You cannot have Christianity without Trinity. The incarnation no longer makes sense. How God then saves creation from sin no longer makes sense. How God even interacts with the world no longer makes sense. At least as Christians understand that. And so, the Trinity is the foundation of Christian belief. And that's a funny thing because even though it's the foundation of all Christian belief, it's probably also the thing that's least understood or even thought about amongst Christians. And I think that's sad because it's definitely one of the most interesting things to think about, being that the Trinity is God. So let's review the absolute attributes. A, you got them? Aha, yes, being, simplicity, infinity, eternal, immutable. I don't want to explain all these again, but you can go back to either the lecture on the incarnation or, the lecture at the first weeks where we talk about these. Also the transcendentals. Remember what those are? Being, goodness, truth, beauty, and unity. And so, as we talked about, God is and is the source of all these things. God doesn't just have simplicity. God is simplicity. God doesn't just have being. God is being itself. Now, the absolute attributes are the things that God has that no other being has or can have. It's impossible. No other being can be eternal. Only the transcendent being, God. But the transcendentals are the things that transcend that relationship and that we can't be them, but we can participate in them. We can't participate in infinity, but we can participate in goodness. So, this then, of course, raises the question, how can there be distinction in pure unity? If being is simple and can't have parts, how can you have three persons? How can you have a simple divine essence and then three persons who participate in that essence? Well, it's a mystery. I will not be unraveling the mystery of the Trinity in this lecture, but I will tell you what we say about it so that you can understand that it's not an illogical belief. It may not be persuasive, but it's not illogical. It's beyond logic. And so the way we say it, and this is the official definition of the Trinity is one God, one nature, one essence, divinity, in three persons, or three persons in one nature. Now, of course, the question has to be asked then, what's an essence or a nature, and what are persons? Well, to begin with essence comes from the Latin word esse, which means to be. That is, essence is simply a category of being. It is the essential characteristics or attributes that are proper to that being. And so all beings have essence, or have a nature. Okay? So human nature is something that all humans share in, right? Dogs have a nature to be furry, to be four-legged, to bark or whatever. All dogs have a share in something called an essence, a dogginess. Same with humans. An essence is the nature and thus category of the kind of being you are. What is that thing over there? Well, it does all the things dogs do, so it must be a dog. It participates in the category of dogness. And so essence is really just the nature of the being. And so for the divine nature, what makes the divine nature the divine nature? What is the essence of divinity? Well, it's the absolute attributes and the transcendentals. It is that it's simple, infinite, eternal, mutable, and being itself, aseity. That it is being, unity, truth, goodness, and beauty. And so this is what the divine nature is, so to speak, to the extent that we can even answer that question. So then the question becomes, so that's easy though. We've been talking about that all term. We got that down, right? God is transcendent, and that means this. So the nature of the transcendent, the divine nature, is these things. Well, then the question really is, what is a person? That is an extraordinarily difficult thing to figure out or say. Because the weird thing about persons is that we encounter them all the time. I mean, you yourself are a person. You encounter yourself. It's kind of like consciousness. It's such a mystery, and yet it's the thing that we're always interacting with. We can't understand consciousness, but we can't understand anything without it. We can't be ourselves. We can't understand ourselves, but we can't be anything without ourselves. So a person is a fundamentally mysterious thing. One way to put it is that it's the whole sum of what you specifically are. So it's important to note that in classical philosophy and theology, persons are distinct from other kinds of beings. Not all beings are persons, We don't think of a dog as a person. We certainly don't think of it as a lamp as a person, or a book as a person. There's something unique about being a person. And so Boethius famously said, it's the rational nature. Kind of that whole imago Dei thing, that soul stuff that we were talking about in week 2. It's that thing that makes us conscious, sentient, rational beings. That is a mark of personhood, that we can be like that, right? But that's not quite enough, because persons are more mysterious than just their rational capabilities. And so Richard of St. Victor said they are an incommunicable existence of a, he said intellectual, not spiritual nature, sorry, of an intellectual nature. Now, intellectual nature, he basically means, for our purposes today, same thing as a rational nature. We have minds. Only beings with minds can be rational. Rational beings must have minds. We have minds. We have intellects. We can think. We can rationalize. So that's definitely a mark of a person. And like Boethius says, it's an individual substance. I am a person, and thus, even though, say, you and I are both humans, we're not the same human. We are distinguished by our personhood. Okay? Everything about your humanity and my humanity is the same. But what makes us different is that you are a different person than me. And, says Richard of St. Victor, furthering it, that is incommunicable. So, I can never fully communicate to you, give you my personhood. We can share in nature, we can share in rationality, we can share in all these things, but you can never be me, and I can never be you. And so the uniqueness of your personhood is incommunicable, and thus is what's the word I'm looking for? It's where you can't divide it anymore. I'm sorry, I hate it when I can't think of a word, but it's incommunicable. It can't be reduced to anything further. You are your person, and you can't be reduced to something lower than your person. So your personhood is actually more fundamental in a way than your nature. And your personhood fully expresses your nature, but it's not reducible to that nature. You are not just a human. You are a particular human with an identity, with a personal, rational identity. I am Alex. You are Frank or John or Lydia or Martha. I know I'm choosing names that I know nobody has in the class, so you don't feel like I'm being favorites. But anyway, there's something incommunicable about it. So let's do a little thought experiment. It's a little weird, but imagine there was a person who was like, I don't know, had all kinds of like powers of invisibility and stuff. It's just really weird, and also was obsessed with someone, stalking them, really. And they watched this person from birth. And they were always present. They never slept. And they recorded every single thing that this person ever said, thought, they're telepathic, thought, did, every face they made. And they wrote every single thing down in some supercomputer. They never said a word to this person, but they know every single thing about that person. And then they printed it all out in some super file and they gave it to you, and they said, you now have enough energy and years to read all of this. If you read all of it, would you know that person? Of course not. Does that weird stalker super being know that person? Of course not. They don't know that person. They know everything about that person. They might know so much about that person they can predict with better accuracy what that person will do in any given situation than the person themselves would. But they don't know that person. Let's call her Shelley. They don't know Shelley. Why? Because you can't communicate personhood through a bunch of propositions and formulas. They're mysterious. There's something that is deeper. And so even though that person knows everything about Shelley, Shelley's husband knows Shelley, and positing they have a great marriage. Shelley's husband knows that person better, and will always know that person better than this weird stalker dude. Why? Because persons aren't reducible to information. Natures give you information about a being. Persons tell you not just what they are. Natures tell you what a thing is. Persons tell you who they are. And that is why persons are seen most clearly in love. That is, persons are seen most clearly in relationships. The reason why Shelley's husband knows Shelley better than the creepy weird thing is because Shelley and her husband are in a relationship, a loving relationship. You cannot communicate your singular, unique identity. Your personhood is what makes you a singular, unique being. You're not a chair among chairs. You're not even a duck among ducks or a monkey among monkeys. You are a person. You're not just a human among humans. You are a person. And that personhood is fundamentally expressing your identity. And so, in order for someone to really know you, they have to be in a relationship with you. And in order to know you best, that relationship would have to be one of love. So as 1 John says, God is love. Natures can't love. It's impossible. Natures can't love any more than lamps can love. Or in a sense, even dogs can love, as we talked about when we talked about the soul. It's not like dogs don't have qualities of admiration and, get pleasure from being around you, but they don't love you like a person loves you. If you think that, that's a seriously problematic thought. Dogs aren't rational. They can't love as persons. And so if the divine nature is just the divine nature and not personal, well then the divine nature doesn't love. It's just like we talked about with the Greeks and the Romans. It's just a mathematical principle. It's just a set of attributes. Yeah, it's simple. It's being itself. It's immutable. It's infinite. So what? Doesn't mean it cares about anything. It can be all that and not care about anything. No, it's being a person, being a who, that creates love, makes love possible. And so the Trinity is love itself, because the Trinity is eternally and foundationally relational. So cool. And remember, eternal is not just everlasting. It's not just it goes on forever. No, it is timeless. It never had a beginning. It never had an end. It doesn't go on or go back anywhere. It's atemporal. It's timeless. Souls can be everlasting. Christians hold that your soul is everlasting. It's going to live on forever and ever and ever. But it does have a beginning. Eternal means there's not a beginning because they are not time-bound. So the Trinity as love is an internal and foundationally relational reality. God was always a Trinity, will always be a Trinity, because God doesn't change. So what does that mean and how does that work? Well, this is what we call the eternal procession. And that is the procession of the Father, Son, and Spirit. So you have the innascible Father. The innascible just means unable to be born, unbegotten, can't be begotten, can't be born, has no beginning. And this is the primum principium, the first principle. And that being, we'll call him the Father for now. We call him the Father, but that being is personal and thus can love. But a person who loves has to have a terminal agent to love. You can't just love into nothing. And so the way Christians say it is that when the Father turns on himself and loves himself, this beloved begets a second term, something to receive the love and express the fullness of the lover. This is the Son. And so in the Father, by expressing love, expresses a person to receive that love, and thus expresses a person perfectly identical to the Father's own self, and so eternally expresses love in the Word or the Son of God. And that is the second person of the Trinity in Jesus. And then this second person, the Son, looks back upon the Father and loves the Father back. And this produces the love between them. And that ending term is the Spirit. And so basically, you have the lover, the beloved, and the love itself. The Father looks upon the divine nature and loves it, and that produces, and we're saying produces, but this isn't happening in time. There's not a before and after. This is just the way God is always. And that's really difficult, but you can't think of these happening in moments. There was a time when the Son did not exist. No, the Son always exists because the Father always loves. The Spirit always exists because the Father and the Son always love each other. The Spirit always exists because the Spirit is the love between the Father and the Son. And these are all just metaphors. You can't actually say what's actually going on in the Trinity. But the best we can do is through the reality of love and personhood, because that's the mark of God on creation itself. And so, basically, what's happening is that the Father produces the Word in an act of love, and then that love explodes between them, producing the third person. And together, these three people are all God because they're all sharing in the same nature. When the Father produces the Son by loving, and then the Father and Son produce the Spirit by loving each other, they're not producing something outside of God. This isn't creation. Creation is outside of God. They're not producing something of a different kind of nature. The Father, in loving the Son and the Spirit and being the love between them, is not of different natures. They are all the divine natures. And so it comes to this really cool diagram that Christians have had for a long, long time. It's way, way, way back. The Father is not the Son. The lover is not the beloved. And the Son is not the Spirit. The beloved is not the love. And the Spirit is not the Father. The love is not the lover. They are distinct terms. But they're all in the same nature. And therefore, the Father is not the Son is not the Spirit is not the Father, but the Father is God. The Son is God, and the Holy Spirit is God. And so, basically, what that means is one God in three persons is the full expression of deity. Each person is complete and fully participating in the divine nature. Each person is simple, eternal, infinite, immutable. Each person possesses being from itself. There's nothing before these persons, and there's nothing after them, and there's no moment when they aren't all there. Every person is the fullest expression of God. This is how we say Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, is fully God. And so it's not that these persons are unitary manifestations or divisible parts. So, modalism says, God the Father came down and became the Son, and then the Son died, rose from the dead, went up into heaven, then came back down as the Spirit. No, these aren't different modes of being. These three persons coexist in a co-eternal relationship. And it's not partialism. It's not as though if you cut up if you throw the Father plus the Son plus the Spirit equals God. No, no. They are all each fully God. They're not an equation that you add together. They are all one God, one divine nature, infinite, simple, eternal. And that's what makes it so exciting, because that means this love is fundamental to the divine being. God is not just personal. God is fullest expression of personality, and thus the fullest expression of love, comprehensible. It's even beyond comprehension. You can't reduce it beyond itself. It is self-sufficient love. So with the Trinity, God is not just being from itself, God is love from itself. And you can't love a nature, just like you can't love a tree or a bike or a chair, and that love be at all shared. You can love a tree or a bike or a desk or a chair, but it's not going to love you back. And so it's not the fullness of love. In the Trinity, because there is the dynamism of love, God, in God's own being and nature, is the fullness of everything love can be. And so it is true to say God is love. God is perfect harmony, perfect unity, because God has perfect distinction. God is perfectly and fully harmonious beyond every concept of harmony, because God has different, distinct persons to be in harmony with each other. And so, as we say in the liturgy, Catholics at least, Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with the Father in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever. As John says, and so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives and loves lives in God and God in them. This is how love is made. How is love made? Because it's in perfect relation of harmony. God is love, because God is three persons perfectly reflecting each other and loving each other. This is the perichoresis that your readings talked about. So your readings were getting into all the technical details in as much as is appropriate for a 1,000 level course. And don't think that those readings or this lecture is the end of everything to be said about the Trinity. No, if you really want to understand it, I mean, I've been studying the Trinity for 12 years now. I have a PhD in divine and human psychology, and it's a theology psychology. Don't even hear the word psychology. I talk about how the Trinity relates to the soul. And I don't understand it. There's no understanding it, and I'm still learning more all the time. Okay? The Trinity is not something you just sit down and be like, oh, got it, If there's a Trinity for Dummies book out there, it's probably dumb. No, but this is the beginning of the doctrine. In a sense, it's always the beginning of the doctrine, because the Trinity is always the fresh newness of life, leading us further on into that strange country called life, as the poet Rilke said. He says, over there is the country called life. You will know it by its seriousness. So, God is love because God is the full expression of love and the full culmination of love. That one gives, one receives, and then gives back. So that love is not just begun but completed. And so the eternal foundation of reality, the transcendence that gives rise to all other being in reality, is love, perfectly expressed in one single nature through three perpetually interpenetrating persons. And so, this is how creation becomes new. Because only God can create, and thus only God can recreate. And so if there's going to be a recreation, there has to be a being that can carry out the act both on the side of the creator and on the side of the created. And that's who Christ is. So Christ is the second person of the Trinity, mediating between the nature of God and the other persons of God and us. And so, this is one small, pitiful even, but I'm not embarrassed at that. I mean, there are better people who can explain it. There are people who can explain it better. There are different ways to explain it. But at the end of the day, the glory of the Trinity is not because it can be explained, but because it can be loved. Because the Trinity is love. And that's my thoughts on the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. I would love to hear more about what you think, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Sorry again for having a late lectures, and I will get back with you next week when we look at how this restoration is being done and what this restoration will culminate in. That is, looking at the church and then the end times, or heaven and hell. I will see you then.